I come from a pre-sampler generation. I come from, as a kid, having a tape machine, banging things, taping them, cutting them up, splicing them back together again. And then somewhere in the late 70s, my friend Stephen Payne brought back this thing from Australia called the Fairlight. And, yes, we did all those stupid things. We got my dog to bark and wrote music on that, but very quickly realized that this was actually, on the one hand, really interesting, and at the same time, it was actually sort of slightly dull unless you really did something with it, because all you were doing is you were taking these still snapshots of a moment in time. But so since the 70s, I've been sampling everything that makes a noise.
And what was the first one? Was it the dog bark?
It was probably the dog barking, and then it quickly, gravitated towards more sort of interesting things like, ooh, we can do a whole orchestra. Well, we couldn't do a whole orchestra. Because one of the inherent qualities, which I very quickly realized about the Fairlight, was it sounded terrible. And what you put in is not necessarily what you got out. And my flatmate at the time, who was my recording engineer, Steve Rance, who was cursed with the gene of truthfulness, said to me, but this thing sounds terrible, and we just spent, I don't know how many tens of thousands of pounds on this thing. And he started taking it apart, and he, to cut a long story short, there were lots of phone calls from my flat to Australia to the Fairlight people, and with Steve ending up as being head of software at Fairlight, and my machine constantly being tweaked and updated. Then suddenly all these other samplers started to appear. Like I still think the Archives 1000 is one of the greatest samplers. At the end of the day, I don't think the issue really is about the recording medium, but it is about the players and the whole team. And I think you're not going to get quite the same results by having your mate in the flat next door go and bang on a biscuit tin, even though it might be interesting, than if you get if you get the best players in the world to go and know where to hit it. A drum is sort of this interesting, archaic thing, but there are like sweet spots when you hit it just right, and and I mean, these guys have been doing it forever. So it's really about the human beings that go and create the sound that ultimately will tell you if it's any good. My sonic world evolves. It keeps evolving. The orchestral sounds keep evolving. As as our technology becomes redundant, the funny thing that's never become redundant are those sounds, are those performances we got from the players. It's the best investment I ever made was to start sampling the orchestra in 1994. It's something I still use on a daily basis, because the orchestra is the orchestra. We just keep adding articulations and refinements to it. And the same with the percussion. I mean, I could still drag out an old Fairlight, and it's still hard to beat the Darbuka samples on that, which were all over Rain Man. And if I dragged it out now, everybody would be going, wow, this sounds really new. But it's really not new, it's just timeless.
Would you say that you have a preference over played versus, live music combined with sampled?
It's not a preference, it's just that's my aesthetic. It's very simple. The music always sounds best in my head before, as I invent it. It sounds best in my head. And then from there on, there comes this sort of topsy-turvy slope of sometimes things get better when the real orchestra plays it, sometimes things can't be played. For instance, I mean, if you take percussion, when they're all roaring away and they're in the middle of the orchestra, yeah, it sounds fantastic. But the thing you can't do is you can't find the balance between a really, really quiet head and an orchestra playing loud. And when you have a really, really quiet head, it just sort of blooms beautifully in the room. So that's where you have to go and cheat. You have to use technology. You have to, it is just physically impossible. And one of the things that I love about technology is that it forever pushes up against the boundaries of physics. So whatever works, works. And, I mean, I remember when, Trevor Horn and I were working together, and we started getting people to play to click tracks, and, they just thought that was awful, and it would take all the humanity out of it, as opposed to, you know, the way we thought was that there was a tightness to it. There was a commitment to hitting the drum really in time, and it took, you know, it took all the musicians a while to get around to it, to figure out how to groove in this sort of tight way. Now everybody does it.
Now, Spitfire said that you use more microphones than they do, and that they found it kind of fascinating in the fact that you can sample and use a sample in the same room, two different sets of samplers, and get completely different sounds.
Yeah, well, one of the things I'm really interested in is perspective. Where in the depth things are happening. You know, I try to create these sort of 3D landscapes, basically. And one of the things about that is this where you place your microphones, what hall you're in. I mean, I think one of the reasons I like working with the Spitfire guys, other than that they have a wicked sense of humor, is we seem to sort of agree on the aesthetic that if you put a musician into a great acoustic environment, they automatically will get feedback from that environment and play better. You know what? So whatever noise they make will be a better noise. I think the things that make up a great sound is a great performance in a great space with a great recording engineer. And each recording engineer has a different style and a different sonic picture in their own head. So for instance, one of the things I've been doing on Superman, Batman is, you know, for instance, of using both Alan Meyerson and Steve Lipson. You get this sort of, you know, very different sonic aesthetics, but they're both really interesting and really valid. And both of these guys have made records or soundtracks or whatever, you know, have made recordings that I love. With Steve, you know, I mean, all the Frankie Goes to Hollywood stuff, the Greystone Slave to the Rhythm, the Annie Lennox records. I mean, you know, I think those are sort of milestone recordings. You know, with Alan, obviously, you know, all the stuff that we've done together.
I think Alan said, what, 20 years you guys have been together?
It feels like 50. My newest secret weapon as well is Tom Holkenberg, Junkie XL, who is a drummer, is huge in the sort of electronic dance music field, is an amazing programmer himself, and has, you know, I mean, our aesthetics overlap, but he has different methods of doing it. So I thought, what if we take the same sources and just give it to all these different people and just see what happens? I keep wearing more than one hat. You know, one second I'm the composer, the next second I'm the sound designer. I can't help myself. I got to go and sit there, and drum tracks come in, etc., and I have to take them apart, and I have to do my own EQ and my own compression, and because I hear a sound in my head, and I know how to get there. I mean, you know, I suppose, in a funny way, I would have been just as happy being a recording engineer as a composer, you know. And sometimes it's actually very difficult to stop me from mangling sounds and engineering or doing any of those things, and actually getting me to sit down and write the notes.
Like a kid in the candy store.
Totally, absolutely.
Now, for this project, I think you're using 4 engineers, is that right?
Who am I using? I got Junkie, I got Steve Lipson, I got Alan Meyerson. Who's the 4th one? I am the 4th one. Am I the 4th one? Oh, Jeff Foster. God, yes, I forgot about. Let's start that one again. So much of the stuff originates with Jeff Foster, and you know, I think Jeff probably engineered my very first session. It might have been sort of one of his first sessions as well. So we go back, and Jeff knows this hall better, you know, than anybody I know, or he knows how I use that hall. So between Jeff and Alan, there's a sort of a patented Hans Zimmer sound. And then bringing in Steve Lipson and bringing in Junkie and bringing in myself, you know, there's a way that we can take that raw material. And one of the reasons there's so many microphones is because Steve wants a different set of microphones than Jeff wants, for instance, and Alan wants a different set of microphones than Steve wants, and they all want them placed in different ways. So there's a lot more to be gotten out of it, and I'm not even just talking about giving people flexibility. I'm just talking very much about giving people something that that has a different point of view and is probably going to have different uses. You know, you're not always going to write the same piece of music, so there has to be a, you know, these sounds have to be adaptable.
Tell me a little bit about working with Jason Bonham. We had the pleasure of being there the day he was recording. And
I've just finished this movie called Man of Steel, and at one point I had this idea of this sort of drum circle, and I invited some of the best drummers in the world into this. I mean, I had Sheila E., I had Pharrell Williams, I had J.R. Robinson, I had Vinnie Colaiuta, I had Jim Keltner. I mean, okay, so it's a fair list, you know. And I'd phoned Jason and said, you know, Jason lives in Miami, and I said, hey, do you want to come in? It's just one day of, you know, fair mayhem. Do you want to come in? He said, yeah, absolutely. And the thing I noticed was that even with all these other drummers around, Jason was just louder. There's a spirit, you know. There's a sort of, it's, of course it's in his DNA, you know, and I think there's something to be said for that. And it was just sort of an absolute delight to have him come in, and because here's my thing about sampling: ultimately there is a performance in every single hit, and so and the personality. It's music is a sort of a subtle thing. I mean, it's like Andy Nelson, the great dubbing engineer, once said to me, you know, how come you can recognize an Ennio Morricone track on the first note? You know, because the way his orchestra plays, you know, you can recognize the character of the players in one note, and so what you try to do is you try to surround yourself with people. You know, this thing, my little drum circle, it wasn't about name recognition. I mean, there is name recognition because these guys are extraordinary. Because you want to find these players that have a sound of their own, that where each hit has an identity and a commitment behind it, and you hear it, you feel it, and it does something truly extraordinary.
it was interesting, Jason said, you know, he doesn't read music, sheet music.
Nor do I.
He plays from the heart, and perhaps that's something you were looking for.
It's always something I'm looking for. I mean, the best music really happens once people really know what they're playing and they're not looking at their notes anymore. You know, they have made it their own, you know, and I spend a lot of time rehearsing with the orchestras, and I found lots of different ways of figuring out how to make things so it becomes not just, you know, a cold reading for them. You know, I had 2 weeks of piano lessons. That's my formal education. So I know that that's not the absolute be-all and end-all of knowing how to make music. Listen, everybody in the world reads, but it doesn't make them into Shakespeare, does it? So the reading part isn't that important. The heart part is important. You know, and Jason is all soul and all heart. I mean, he really is. And at the same time, there's a courage to hit things in a certain way, you know, and there's an imagination that goes on as well, which I really find really great, you know. Plus, the other important thing is he's a good chap to hang around with. You get to have a bit of a giggle.
Absolutely. Now, you did the percussion recording with Jason on the Newman stage. Tell me a little bit about why Newman versus, say, Air Studios.
Completely different acoustic. I mean, Air's a big hall. It's really a church, so the acoustic is very different. And the Newman stage is a big room, really. Plus, it really has a beautiful acoustic. It has a beautiful top end, and the bottom end is second to none. It's actually my favorite stage in Los Angeles, even though we did some stuff over at Sony as well. Well, between those 3 rooms, actually, plus we did some stuff here. We have a very interesting, let's say, sounding room, which is it's really rough, and it's got real grit and character, and you can't leave without having dirt on your fingernails. So having these different acoustic environments is I think a real plus, because you just suddenly, first of all, the musician responds differently to each acoustic, and secondly, you get a much larger palette to play with. And one of the things that I thought would be interesting for this project is to really create a fairly large palette of sonic possibilities. Everything takes 10 times as long as I planned, because what starts off as a simple little idea, then suddenly, as soon as you put the word out that you have an idea, other people come and add their ideas to it, and some of those are great, and you embrace them, and some of them you don't want to embrace, but whatever happens is, the project is going to expand. So what started off as, oh, let's just go and do a couple of days at Air and be done with it, now turned into this enormous undertaking. Plus, there's one other miscalculation I made, which was, it is the season of summer movies. So between Superman, Lone Ranger, and 2 other movies I got on the go that needed a little attention, I'm way behind, and so is my whole team. At the end of the day, we really do want to end up with something extraordinary, because once you get the guys in to start playing and you see how much effort and sweat they put into this, you need to sort of honor that at the other end and do a good job of preserving that energy, and you can't just crank it out. Each one has to be treated like each hit is treated like a little diamond that needs to be shaped and polished and tweaked and played around with.
Tell me, why work with Spitfire?
I like that they like the same room that I like using. Plus, they consistently have ripped me off over the years, which, imitation being a certain form of flattery. But if I think about it, it means that their sense of aesthetics is not that far removed from mine. So that seems to make a good combination. Plus, I think they come at it from the same way that I come at it, whereby they see it as a means to an end, because they're musicians, and really the only reason they're doing it is because they're trying to get more ammunition for their own music. So look, I don't have to do this. This isn't going to make a difference to my bank balance. I'm doing this partly because I think it's interesting. It's an interesting experiment, and I thought people have always been asking how we make these percussion sounds, and it just seemed like a fun thing to do. The musicians are sharing in this, so it was actually a way for them to actually profit beyond the point of just doing this one performance. It was a way of saying thank you, but you have to go and put a bit of sweat into it as well, for the last 9 years of bashing drums for me.
Do you think it will create a bit of a controversy, affecting the livelihood of musicians, what with the music business being what it is? No one's really sure where it's headed.
Well, nobody knows where it's heading. The serious note about it is, if we were to lose the orchestras, if we were to lose these halls, and if we were to lose the ways and means of creating music with a large body of people in a room, it would be a tragedy way beyond the impact on the musician. It would rob our culture of a means of communicating, and that's sort of the serious aspect to it. So one of the things I'm interested in, I've always been interested in, is how can I keep the orchestras alive? And if you think about what I do and what all the other film composers do, is we on a daily basis commission orchestral music, and we're keeping these orchestras alive. And if I can somehow persuade by giving young composers, young musicians, tools that will make them sound fabulous, I hope that somewhere along the way from their demo that's gotten them some crazy, fantastic job, and a decent budget, they're going to go, oh, you know something? I should go and hire some real musicians to go and play on this. You have to see it as a means to an end. Progress in technology is not necessarily a good thing, but it is a thing that exists, and we just have to go and figure out how to navigate in this world where these possibilities exist. Sampling isn't the reason that concert halls are empty. What our job is to drive music forward, to make it interesting, to make it commercial in the best possible sense. To say, you know, an orchestra can rock out. I mean, you can go and see an orchestral performance and it'll knock your socks off. I'm just interested in seeing how far we can push that. I mean, movies is one way, sampling is another way, live performance is another way. And the way these, you know, it's one of the reasons I love working with Junkie XL, because, you know, I mean, he does these shows in front of 250,000 people, and, you know, they go nuts. And it's just one man and his synthesizers. You know, he's just written his first symphony, which was performed in Amsterdam. So, you know, yes, with a full orchestra. So these ideas are not mutually exclusive. You know, tools are tools. All music relies on technology. A violin is just, you know, a bit of good carpentry and some dead cats. I mean, it does involve a certain amount of technology to get you there. At the end of the day, it's the ingenuity of the player and it's the ingenuity of the composer that are going to go and really make something out of this thing. What I do care about is to give people the opportunity to go and make music. One of the things which I always thought was phenomenal about music is that sense of all of us getting into a room and bringing a piece of music to life. And that doesn't mean you can't be sitting there with your sampler. You know, you can still play along with other people, you know. I mean, the playfulness, I think, is really important in this whole thing. And you know, you asked me why Spitfire, because I think they're reckless and playful. So I think they fit right in.
So there must be one thing left that you haven't sampled. Is there something you're looking to the future to make sure you get a sample of?
Here's an interesting thing about sampling. Sampling is inherently boring because it just captures one moment in time, and then you regurgitate that moment in time and time again. So it's a never-ending process, because as soon as you got the perfect string sound, you're already bored with it. So you have to keep going back to the well, and you have to keep getting those drummers in, you have to keep getting those players in, and, you know, adding fresh meat, because otherwise, you know, you go up to your keyboard and you play that chord and it sounded just the way it sounded yesterday. So I see this as a constantly evolving process. And yeah, sure, look, just now I'm working on Lone Ranger, and it's about the train being built through America. So yes, I went and demolished a couple of train tracks and trains with sledgehammers, etc. You know, that was quite a good sound. Wherever I go, I hear things, you know, and as the technology gets better, I'm actually more interested in, you know, how can we capture really quiet things and bring those really close and bring your attention to them, you know, put things under the microscope, reveal things that aren't revealed. And I mean, this modern world we live in is inherently noisy. So much of beautiful sound gets masked by, you know, just the sheer, you know, anarchy of engine noises and air conditioners and somebody drying their hair and mowing their lawn and all that sort of stuff. And part of what's happened over the years as well, because I've been doing this sampling for so long, is there's a sort of a certain preservationism that goes on. There's a, for instance, my favorite cellist in London who who I've sampled for years. He just retired and sold his Stradivarius. So that's the end of that era to a certain degree, except that sound still exists in my library. And that performance still exists in my library. So there's a sort of a historical archival thing that rather than just having, you know, a great recording of a Fort Wegener performance, you actually can go and create new music from scratch with those great performances.
You do a lot of work in Europe, especially London. Why London?
Because I got a great fuck-off flat there. No, that's probably not the answer you were looking for. Because that's where I started. And, you know, I was a session musician in London, you know, then joined a band, you know, and sort of went from there. And the greatest compliment I think I've ever gotten, better than Oscar, better than Grammy, etc., was towards the end of the last Dark Knight Rises. You know, working with those percussionists that we've just sampled, these guys have played on everything. They're the guys. You know, there's nothing they haven't played. So my great ambition has always been to go and do just one thing where they go, wow, never done that before. I actually figured something. I'm not going to go into the details, but you know, number one, I got the compliment of going, wow, we've never done this before, and it sounds really good. And the other thing was, one of them took me aside and he said, you know, like 30 years ago or so, you know, you were in amongst us, and then you left and you went to Hollywood, and you could have turned into a right old prat. But at the end of the day, you're still just one of us. You're still a complete musical bastard. And somehow, I thought that was the best compliment I ever had. I hadn't lost my roots, and it's really important to me, out of many reasons, to support those roots. And one of the things is I love the way that space sounds. That's how I hear music. You know, it is in that space. It's where I grew up, and so it always gives me not only a sense of where I come from, but you know, I have worked very hard over the last 30 years at really learning, understanding, manipulating, and recording that space and getting better at it. You know, with the help of Jeff Foster's and Steve Lipson's and Alan Meyerson's. You know, it's not just me, it's a whole, you know, music doesn't happen in some sort of vacuum. It's a whole team effort.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I think I probably said too much.
Not at all. We thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome. It's all right.
Yeah, fantastic.
It must be difficult to have your head wrapped around all of it.
No, it's just I'm getting vertigo with him going.
Yeah, going back and forth. Oh, no.
I hope you're doing the same with the sound, because you know you have to keep the phase symmetry between the image and the
Macro sound.
yeah.